With Mick Jagger are William Rees-Mogg, editor of the Times newspaper, Father Thomas Corbishley, a leading British Jesuit, Lord Stow-Hill, formerly Sir Frank Soskis, who has been Home Secretary and Attorney General, and Dr. John Robinson, Bishop of Woolwich and author of the controversial reassessment of Christianity, Honest to God. Mick Jagger has been silent for 3 months. He's read of people saying he's got what's coming to him, of a poll of young people in which 85% said his offence deserved a jail sentence, and he read the Times asking, who breaks a butterfly on a wheel?
Ladies and gentlemen, could I just ask you, take your pictures as speedily as possible. Don't think we've been unreasonable by asking Mr. Jagger.
Earlier, Mick Jagger talked briefly to a press conference after the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Parker, had quashed his 3 months prison sentence for possessing amphetamine tablets and substituted a 12 months conditional discharge. Lord Parker told Jagger, if you keep out of any trouble for the next 12 months, what has happened will not be on your record as a conviction. If you do commit another offence, you will not only be punished for that offence, but brought back and punished for this one. Lord Parker also said that whether he liked it or not, Jagger was the idol of a large number of young people. He had grave responsibilities, and if he committed a further offence, should expect a higher penalty because of his responsibilities. Keith Richard, the other Rolling Stone convicted with Jagger, left the appeal court free. The court quashed his conviction of permitting his house to be used for the smoking of hemp.
And one more happy one for me. Okay, gentlemen, can we call it a day?
Yeah. As an idol of many young people in this country today, you have a very grave responsibility.
It's a grave view.
How do you propose to
Exercise
that now?
Well, that's very difficult. One perhaps doesn't ask for responsibilities. Perhaps one is given responsibilities when one is pushed into the limelight in this particular sphere rather than asking to be. And asked to be pushed into this, and in a way really asked to be my private life to be left alone, so as it were. But my responsibilities, as far as that goes, are only to myself. You know, in the public sector, such as to do with my work, my records, and etc. I have a responsibility, but in my private, the amount of baths I take or my personal habits are of no consequence to anyone else or anything.
Do you mean that you were picked upon because you are who you are?
I don't think we were picked upon in that way, but it's just that applies to everybody. The responsibility only applies to us because who we are.
Good chance probably to talk to you.
Are you going to make a film?
Can you just
I don't propagate religious views such as some pop stars do. I don't propagate drug views such as some pop stars do. This whole sort of thing was pushed upon me.
By whom?
By the mere fact I've been prosecuted, and also with Keith being prosecuted. We didn't make a public statement on religion, on drugs, or anything like that.
After the press conference, World in Action took Jagger by helicopter to the quiet location he asked for. There he talked about his attitude to the society he lives in with some of the people responsible for it.
Mick, you've had a difficult day, and you've had a difficult 3 months, to put it mildly. And now you're sitting in this garden with a bench full, or a garden seat full, of the establishment opposite you. Rather like a Beerbohm cartoon. And you obviously have a power to communicate to very large numbers of people, young people, in Britain, United States as well, which we don't have. And therefore, what we'd like to do would be to discuss with you the things that you believe in and think are important, and see what we feel about them. You're often taken as a sort of symbol of rebellion, and mothers deplore the influence of the Rolling Stones because they think that the Rolling Stones are rebellious. Do you think that the society that you live in is one you ought to rebel against, or do you think you're rebelling against it?
Yes, definitely rebelling against it. I mean, not in the obvious way that a newspaper or pop sort of headline would do it, but obviously we feel there are things wrong with society, but I haven't until very recently been into this kind of discussion at all, because I haven't really felt it's been my place, or through my knowledge, I don't think is enough to start pontificating on these kind of subjects. I've tried to keep out of discussions on religion, such as some pop stars trying to set a good example to teenagers by being religious, or others will try and set an example by saying you should take this kind of, I've taken these drugs or these drugs. They try to keep out of that. But one finds oneself, society, more or less, has pushed one into this position, never asked to be pushed into it. And Lord Parker today said you have a great responsibility, which has been so much pushed upon us, rather, the influence that we have has been pushed upon us, especially during this drug thing, was once asked to make certain pronouncements on it, where this is really, all this kind of thing is really part of one's private life, Before this, I didn't really want to talk about it.
One invariably gets drawn into controversy, Mr. Jagger, doesn't it? What I'd like to ask you really is this. You appeal to millions of young people. You give them pleasure, they enjoy your art. How do you conceive yourself as an influence with them? What is, the word, a message is rather an overworked word, but in your personality, in your approach to music and rhythm and so on, what is the way in which you would like yourself to be understood amongst young people particularly?
Well, just in the very way that I started myself, when I was quite young.
Yes.
Which is just to have as good a time as possible, which most young people do try and do, without any regard to responsibilities of any sort, social, family or others, because they tend to have very few at that age.
Do you think society today is more corrupt than it was, or do you think society is always largely corrupt and we have a duty to rebel against it? Or?
Yes, I think it's always been in need of checking the corruption, I don't know what kind of corruption they're talking about exactly here, but...
No, that's what I'd like to know.
But today, one's faced with a very different situation than in past centuries, perhaps, because of communication, for instance, which is... none of us could have had the communication this in any other century that we have, instant communication, such as we're doing now. And this influences far more people. And with the small education even that one is allowed today for freely, this also affects this, which makes this generation and all these just post-war thing and the money and everything else very different to the others. And also this generation has had there was no America to go to, such as in the last century. If you really didn't like it here, you could go to America, start afresh.
What are the qualities you think that your generation is going to bring forward? Because quite soon, after all, it's going to be the dominant generation.
Yes, well, this is the formulation of I don't really want to formulate a new code of living or code of morals or anything like that. I don't think anyone of this generation wants to. One really has to see that for the first thing is that the open rebellions, not so much in this country, perhaps as in others, such as America, which are the race riots, for instance. I mean, the race riots in America are not totally on race, This would include a large section of young people in America. These are people that are the worst ones, the worst treated. This is where it will start, here. But there are lots of other people, especially on the west coast of America, who disagree, but perhaps aren't as badly treated or are much better off. But there's a basic thing between them all. It's not just a colour thing. It's against the whole system, which the system to those people which has done them no good at all. Otherwise, they wouldn't be looting and burning.
Clearly, I mean, there are all kinds of sort of ugly and dangerous aspects to this, which you get into very rapidly.
Yes.
And this is the problem, isn't it? When you go for freedom, I mean, you're immediately up against what are the sort of definitions of freedom and limits of freedom.
Yes. Well, this has to be achieved. But I mean, most of any leaders of this kind of freedom movement have been very negative in their approach. I think because, like Leary, for instance, because they felt it's the logical first step to be negative. In other words, drop out.
I mean, you wouldn't really go with Tim.
But I wouldn't, and I'm sure he wouldn't go, as to say that was the final answer. That's just his sort of start to it. And I think perhaps that negative start, a very simple one which everyone can understand, is perhaps a start. I'm sure he wouldn't go to say that was the last word. But to formulate something new, I haven't formulated anything.
Yeah. I sympathise very much.
But you could then be against something in virtue of something more positive. You're against it because you reject it, but you reject it in terms of something which you believe
something
in.
else, yes, but there's certain aspects of it which one doesn't perhaps mind so much. But some of the things, it appears, both in America and Western Europe, that the freedom of the individual is being slowly curtailed. The freedom of this communication has become faster. The freedom of being in control or having anything to do with one of these forms of communication seems slowly to be disappearing. In this country, it seems to be working towards complete state monopoly of radio and television. Perhaps not controlled by the government, certainly in some sort of...
But isn't the problem today that as a result largely of these communications, the quicker our freedoms touch other people's freedoms, our lives touch other people's lives, and therefore we are immediately, much more quickly, up against this question of the limits of freedom without, in fact, creating chaos or danger.
No, I don't think it's got anything to do with it. I don't think individual freedom is affected by mass communication in that way at all.
No, but I mean, I sympathise with you in the way in which this is clamped down on, and I would be very strong if the function of the law is precisely to protect freedom rather than prohibit and suppress freedom, and we're very quickly, I agree, getting into a position where the law is instinctively thought of as against freedom rather than for freedom.
Well, it is,
and
of course. I mean,
think
it's a fallacious argument to say that the law is for freedom, really.
But you would say
especially in lots
sense.
I mean, in cases in obvious cases against the individual wrong in society, such as hitting an old lady over the head or something. This is obvious.
Well, I mean, you would not dissent, would you, from the view that after all, the law tries to intervene between people in order to protect their individual sphere of freedom.
No, I'd say that...
one person doing harm to another, to prevent one person trespassing on another's sphere of free action. Is it really freedom that you would seek to promote, or a kind of, shall I say, intensity of living? I mean, you have the two are not very far apart in a sense, are they? Your appeal to the many people who enjoy your presence, is it really an appeal to develop themselves, to live fully, to live freely in that sense, without trespassing on other person's freedom, and without doing harm to other people?
They should never trespass on other people's freedom.
Yes, but the law changes, doesn't it?
It changes, yes, it does change, but it takes all these things that we're having to go through and all these other things to try and change it.